All right, we're a minute in, so I'm going to get started. Hello and welcome. Welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking Collaborative Power with Git, GitHub CI/CD, and LLMs in Pharma, brought to you by the R Consortium. The R Consortium supports key organizations developing R infrastructure through grants and sponsorships worldwide. Please visit our website to learn all the details and how your organization can become a member. I'm Jesse Kasman, today's moderator. You can ask questions through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, the speakers will be responding. Incidentally, the R Consortium hosts free educational webinars on R-related topics frequently. Upcoming webinars include SaaS to R in Pharma, creating custom solutions for closed source code on September 9th. Please visit our website to find out more. Okay, today we've got a good one. Let me introduce our four speakers who are already on the line. Ning Leng, Ad Interim Global Head, Data Science Acceleration Group at Roche. Eli Miller, Senior Manager of Cloud Solutions at aTorus Research and Technical Lead for Professional Services at aTorus. Ben Straub, Principal Programmer, Immunology Therapeutic Area at GSK. And Eric Nance, statistician, developer, and podcaster. Okay, Ning, I think we're going to start with you with some opening remarks.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you, Jesse. And thanks for joining us today, everybody. And very nice to see you here. So today we'll be talking about how we collaborate as a team in the R Consortium R Submission Working Group. I hope you have some knowledge or some familiarity with the R Consortium Submission Working Group. Basically, a group of us get together probably starting from 5-6 years ago, and in collaboration with FDA, really try to explore how to use R to do regulatory submission with FDA. And every year we run a pilot and then try to show the feasibility and also good practices around R-based submission to FDA. And I remember 5 years ago when Eric, myself, and Eli started this working group. At that time, it was a relatively small working group. We have maybe 5-6 active contributors. So our collaboration workflow has been pretty straightforward at that time. And starting from pilot 3, I believe when you guys started to expand the scope of the submission pilots, including ADAM dataset, etc., we grow the team very rapidly. And I believe for pilot 3 and 4 and 5, now we have 10 or 20 people contributing to the same project. I know in the past presentations, we always talk about what we submitted to FDA, etc. But behind the scene, I'm also very amazed, very impressed by how those people who come together, we don't have an SOP and we don't have a guidance, and we're kind of trying to figure out what is the best efficient way to work together, and also acknowledging that this is a side job of everybody's day job. And I see many PRs and issues come in at late night and weekend time, etc. But on the other side, I just feel like it's very, very efficient in terms of the collaboration over there. And then I see that to bring productivity to this collaboration, we utilize some of the data science and software engineering tools such as Git, such as CI/CD, GitHub Actions. And recently, we also started to explore using LLM to automate some of the check-ins out there. So I thought those are really, really interesting experiment, and then also examples that is actually in action, how people can collaborate together using those modernized tools. So the four of us got together, decided to share a little bit more on how we work together, not too much on the content of the submission, but more on how we work together as a team. So with that, I'll hand to Ben to start with the presentation.
Thanks, Ning. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
See the title? Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So we're going to talk a lot about tools that we've used to collaborate over the last couple of years. I think we've seen definitely some explosion of tools that we want to use to make our jobs easier on these on these pilots, which we'll go over. All right, so yeah, so just like recap what Ning said, we're just presenting here about tools that we've used on the R Consortium pilots to the FDA. The pilots are R-based. We try to make them as much R-based as possible. And so we're going to go over this package called rev, a bit about Git and GitHub, how we use that to collaborate, LLMs and CI/CD. And then there will be some more information about the pilots, but like as Ning said, it's really focused more on the tools on this webinar, whereas in the past we've kind of covered the content of the pilots. And then just to say another shout out to the R Consortium for hosting this and giving us space to work on these projects. I won't read the mission again because Jesse already went over it, but I did want to say that the R Consortium has many working groups. One of them is the submission working group, and we meet the first Friday of every month. It's open to all. Once you get the slides, or maybe we can even put it in chat in a few minutes, but anyone, it's open to all. You can join. You don't have to have our knowledge coming with or submission know-how, but you just got to come with an open mind and a willingness to kind of jump in and participate. So just another shout out to R Consortium for supporting us. And then just to say we've run 5 pilots to the FDA that are focused on our products. So that could be in pilot 1, we did TLFs. Pilot 2, we did Shiny, an interactive dashboard to the FDA. Pilot 3, we converted to Atoms using R code rather than SAS code, which had been previously done. Then in pilot 4A and 4B, we've been exploring WebAssembly and containers. And that's the first 3 pilots, pilot 1, 2, and 3, have all completed, and the FDA has given us a response letter in the affirmative. Pilot 4A and 4B are ongoing. And then pilot 5, if you don't know, the way we deliver data to regulatory agencies is through a file format called XPT, which is an ancient file format that we still use in the pharma industry. And we're looking at ways to, in pilot 5, to explore the use of something called dataset JSON to replace the XPT file. And then I have a question mark here because we're always looking for new pilots. So if you join the group and you have an idea of something you want to explore, we're always looking for new ideas to keep the momentum going. So, I think a problem we have with these pilots is, how do we collaborate, ensure the accuracy of our submissions and they're reproducible while working across many different companies, pharma, CROs, vendors, different platforms, different operating systems, time zones, and skill levels. So, one of those is an R package called rev that's been very instrumental in helping us. And I'll go over the rev, and then I'm going to hand it over to Eli and Eric, where they're going to dive more into the Git, GitHub, CI/CD, and LLM side of things. So, rev is a package that helps us kind of ensure that we can at least reproduce the environment that the work was done in. And I really just love this XKCD comic where it talks about like replication, reproducibility, and how a lot of studies that were done in the early 2000s and 90s and 80s, they're having a lot of trouble replicating it. And then as they've tried to redo them, they've been unable to replicate them. But they're just assuming that this is the crisis has been solved. But I got to say, rev really does solve our reproducible crisis that we're facing with open source products. And there are other tools out there. You might see Eric mentioning RIX as another alternative. But I feel like these tools like Rev and RIX and other tools that kind of lock in your environment are very powerful to kind of prevent this non-reproducibility. That's a phrase that can be used. All right, so let's say a drug company uses a bunch of open source products. They heavily rely on R, which has a ton of packages, which is a great ecosystem. But those packages have dependencies. Those packages have additional dependencies, and it becomes a nightmare to manage. So how can a company, submitting a drug submission and saying this drug is safe and effective, how can they give that to the regulatory agency and say that, you know, you can reproduce this analysis with a list of packages, but you don't know the package versions, you don't know the dependencies? Well, I really firmly believe that Rev is that solution for R-based submissions. And it's a very well-designed, I think, easy to use package. It does take a little bit of a learning curve, but once you kind of get in the swing of things, it helps. It does have an intuitive way to work with it, but it isolates project-specific R package libraries. It captures and locks those packages and those package versions, and you'll see this file used rev.lock. So that's our kind of like anchor of our reproducibility. And this is actually what we've used to submit to the FDA. And they've taken this rev.lock file and they've used it to rebuild the environment. And lately we've been using the rev.lock to help us work with LLMs to help build documentation around the ADRG, which is a analysis dataset reviewer guide, which is a document you do as part of your submission. Again, like I just said, the pilots have been using this to great effect. It does simplify dependency management. And then, again, if you're using RStudio, it does seem to work very well with RStudio, but I think if you just use console R2, it will work fine. All right. And this, I just wanted to highlight, so it does look a little JSON-y, but I just wanted to have a peek of what we've been using in our latest submission. So this is just our kind of like mapping of the revlock file and what's inside of it. So it has all these little bits and pieces spliced into it on down to the author and, you know, where it's located and its, you know, dependencies. And then just, you know, if you're looking to come onto the pilots and help out, you know, I really only use 4 rev commands, maybe a few more from time to time, but really these init, status, snapshot, and remove. I mean, these are my go-to for kind of building, for addressing issues with the lock file. Init just helps you build an R EMV project area. And then the status, you'll see this even in our ADRG documentation, but that just lets you know if there's things out of sync in your environment and how to fix it. Snapshot just lets you capture the environment and write out the lock file. And then rev remove just lets you remove specific packages from your environment. So this is all really important for having a way to operate across multiple companies, but also when we give that information to the FDA or a regulatory agency, that they can recreate the identical environment that we've produced our analysis in. And just a few more like kind of rev tips and tricks. Something that because we've been experimenting a lot more with LLMs and some bots. We have a lot more in our development area for the pilots. We have a lot more scripts that don't actually pertain to the analysis that we're doing. They're just like helper scripts. So if you're familiar with .git ignore, which is just a file to help you ignore things you don't want to commit to Git, Rev also has a rev ignore, which is a big win here for if you want to have packages kind of minimized or not recorded in your lock file. I think something I learned quickly is, you know, don't edit the lock file manually. Use the nice functions to help kind of update or remove stuff from the lock file. And this is important because as we've evolving in our pilots, you know, we want to leverage the lock file to help motivate some of our LLMs that we've been using for example, for the ADRG, which has been consuming that. So I'm going to just turn it over to Eli to talk about the BTW package, but this is, and maybe even Ning, because you're here, if you want to jump in here too. But my understanding is that we've been using the rev.lock file to actually inform the LLM to create the ADRG. So I'll hand it over to the next folks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ben. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but if you hit F on your keyboard, I think that should take us to full screen. Maybe. I could also be lying about that, so no worries either way. Oh, there we go. Nice. Perfect. Yeah, so everything you're going to see in the next couple of slides are all courtesy of Ning. Ning did a lot of great work on some of this stuff, but like Ben was saying, we start with that renv lock file that gives us all of this package metadata, and part of the work of the pilot projects was to create the ADRGs. And in this case, we were able to use the renv lock file as a source of truth, feed it into this BTW package. And what this package does is it gives you the ability to communicate directly with an LLM. So naturally, usually LLMs don't have any idea what the diffdf package is, for example. So the idea is we're able to give an LLM that context. And in this case, we're able to say, give us a description of this package functionality. So when a reviewer is going through your ADRG, they're able to see, all of the packages, all of those versions. And now we've removed a lot of the heavy lifting of creating this ADRG and handed it off to our LLM of choice. So we're able to remove a lot of that work. And another thing that's really helpful with this is we can incorporate this as part of a workflow. So instead of going through manually and updating the ADRG every time you update dplyr or update diffdf, if the functionality in that changes or the version changes or you add a new package, that's all not work that's going to be going back on the developers. We're able to offload that as much as we're able to an LLM. So that's very cool. And thank you, Ning, for all of that work that you did there. If we want to go to the next slide. And here's some similar work that's using the Elmer package. So on the left here, you can see the ADRG from Pilot 3. And on the right, you can see the ADRG from Pilot 5 that we use the Elmer package to create. So they look pretty similar, and they're doing pretty much the same job. On the left, that's something that's manually reviewed and typed out by a developer. They're looking at all of the different data sets and variables that are used in those programs and those outputs, as well as looking at the selection criteria and the filtering for those outputs. On the right there, we actually just did a similar thing where we fed in the script files to an LLM and said, look at these files, figure out what data sets are being used, what variables are being used, also determine what filtering is done on those selection criteria. So again, that's a really helpful tool further down the line where if the study inputs change or the scripting changes and we add a new data set or new variable that's being used in these outputs, that no longer falls to a lot of manual rework by a developer. That's something that's actually able to be handed off to an LLM to be doing these kinds of repetitive features here. So again, thank you so much to Ning for doing all of that work, for going from that metadata from the renv file and these scripts and getting our ADRG most of the way there. If you have any questions on that, you can click on Ning's name there and I'll have it linked to her email. You can also ask any questions in the Q&A section here and she'd be happy to answer those. And next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Git and GitHub and how that enters into these workflows. If you want to go to the next slide there. And for the past few years, I've seen a ton of different ways of using Git and different Git flows and things like that. And I've seen a lot of the benefits as well as a lot of the drawbacks of different ways of crafting your Git flow. Generally, the goal of a Git flow is to satisfy these three goals, which is to, first of all, maximize your useful dev work. So if developers are really concerned about their environment and getting their environment set up, or maybe deploying and testing their code, that kind of detracts from their actual work, which is development and making new features or fixing bugs and improving quality and things like that. That's one of the biggest tripping points that I see. So you want to make sure that every part of your Git flow is serving this purpose or one of the other two. You shouldn't need your developers to kind of shepherd their code through this process. They should really be focusing on developing and testing. So on the right there, you can see an example diagram of a developer and their development efforts flowing into different feature branches. And then those ideally are all kind of automatically taken from stage to stage. So you have your feature branches being merged into a staging branch, gets deployed into your test environment. Once QA approvals and whatever your process is, that can go into your main, getting deployed into production, release tagged and documented as well. Another thing that really helps with these flows would be your code quality. So in every step of the way, from your merge commits to your pull requests to all of those checks that are built in there that I'll talk about a little bit later, all of those should be serving code quality. So for example, making sure your tests are passing before you go into your production environment, or making sure the code is linted and styled properly, making sure the people that need to review it are reviewing it. And this can sometimes conflict with the other two, where if you have 100 different reviewers on a pull request, you're really starting to slow down your development efforts. And then finally is the code velocity. So one key insight for a lot of these Git flows are when a developer is coding and they have all of that work, until that code is in the production environment, it is adding no value. So what I really hate to see a lot of the time is there's hundreds of hours of developer work that is just kind of stuck in this phase of not getting pushed through to the development or the production environment rather. So one of the last things there would be to make sure that once that code is done and tested and approved, as quickly as possible, that can get pushed through into your production environment. And the last couple of things you can see after it's pushed to main are, it's deployed into your production environment, it gets released and tagged for reproducibility and versioning and all of that, as well as your documentation can automatically be built, just as we saw with what Ning built of it taking what we're actually developing and doing that hard work of documenting for us. And there's a little comment on the bottom is that this is very non-authoritative. You should only take what you need. One of the things that I also see is people will build out the Git flow without actually thinking about their development process. So you don't want to have this big, long, complicated Git flow if you only have 2 developers. You might only need one main branch and just resolve conflicts there. Generally, you wouldn't even need the diagram on the right. So make sure you kind of start with that development effort front of mind, and make sure from there you can start to build up. So start with that ground up approach. And next slide, please. Thank you. And here's an example of what a pull request can look like. This is something that we did in Pilot 5. This is an actual pull request from Pilot 5. You can see at the top, Ben is commenting on some of the work that was done, giving his approval there. He's also commenting out to the team, just so everyone is aware of that, and we can collaborate a little bit better there. Also individually tagging someone. A little bit below that, you can actually see all of the checks that were a part of this pull request. So if, for example, there was an issue with the spelling or the linting, you'd see a big red X there that would then be pointed out to both Ben as the reviewer and the original opener of the pull request. So that's really helpful when we are reviewing each other's work to make sure we're not going to be duplicating effort with some of the existing GitHub actions and things like that. And then you can see Ben merge that commit on July 24th. And then at the very bottom, you can actually see we have some project automation there, moving our Kanban board, moving this from to do into the done. And that really helps with our meetings where we're all talking about the things that we're working on and what still needs to be worked on. But all of this is all native into the GitHub platform. If you want to do the next, please. And here's a little bit of a deep dive into those actual code quality checks that I was talking about before, and some of those that you actually saw in the pull request just now. We can make sure that the code style is being adhered to. So usually you use the tidyverse style guide, but there's a lot of different style guides out there. You can choose whichever works best for your workflow. There's the linting, which is kind of spacing and some formatting and things, which is somehow different than style, but a similar thing like that, as well as a spell check. You're testing your code coverage and your build check to make sure your functions are tested, they're passing those tests, and that build check is to make sure it can actually be built and deployed out to your different environments. And now this looks kind of like a lot, but a lot of these are already built into the GitHub platform. So there's the RLib and the Pharmaverse and other contributors. They all have existing actions where you can drop and replace your repository into these. So you don't really have to do a lot of hard CI/CD work. It's all just you putting this YAML file in there and say, do these sequence of tests to make sure all of your code is looking good. Before anything gets into the main branch, it has to pass these tests. And when you're doing your development, you get really clear and actionable feedback of, these are some quality issues that you may be having with your code. If you want to go next. And so here's one of the really cool new things that we did in Pilot 5. One of the issues we were having in previous pilots were we would, send these TLFs out to the FDA, and they would give us some feedback saying, this is great, but we're seeing some differences between the pilots in your TLFs. Can you kind of go and explain what's happening with your TLFs? Why are you getting these different graphics? And that's actually something that's very hard to build into a check. And the reason is when you change to a different version of, ggplot2 or a different version of Lattice or whatever you're actually using to generate the plots are going to look slightly different. They might not be pixel perfect matches of each other, and they don't need to be. They can, convey the same meaning. You can get the same results from it based on those two different results. So one of the things that we did for Pilot 5 was we leveraged an LLM where we gave it these two different images as compare files. And we said, here's the old one, here's the new one. And one of the things you can do in the Elmer package is get a structured chat going. And so that's really just a regular chat that you do with an LLM, but you're getting your results in this structured way. So on the left there, you can say, I'm telling the chat to give me the result in this specific way. So we're getting the difference list as a string, the conclusion as a Boolean, and then a different score as an integer. And so on the right, the comment is able to take all of that information and say, here's your QC check done. Here's it, passing or failing, and then here's an actual score of the differences. And as a result, at the very bottom, you can see it looked at both images and basically found a near perfect match between the two. Those other ones that don't have quite the same score, they might have differences in scaling a little bit or differences in the actual, not the actual values, but differences in some axes and things like that. And those are all things that you can play around with as you're doing this. So if you want your thing to fail, if it has different scaling or things like that, that's something you can tell the LLM. And so this is something that will fail on the GitHub Actions. So we actually have did the LLM say this looked good? And if it didn't, then that's something that has to be resolved. If you want to go next. And here, right before I hand it off to Eric, this is a deployment that's actually being used in this presentation. When we get into our main branch, it'll actually automatically build the presentation and deploy it out. And this is something I'll talk about quickly because Eric has a lot more experience and will talk to it a lot better than I can. But once we have it in our main branch, we don't want to wait for anyone to do anything. It picks it up and immediately deploys it out into our production environment, which is what you're seeing right now with this presentation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Thank you so much, Eli and Ben. Yeah, great setting the stage here. It's really interesting, as Nick mentioned, I've been one of those that's been in this submission working group effort since near the beginning. And it's amazing how things ebb and flow and what we learn from one pilot and then we transfer to another. And this is what I'm going to talk about today is very much inspired by that. So let's keep Pilot 5 in the context here where the files we are developing for these R scripts that produce these dataset JSONs for eventual submission to the FDA. Well, we can't just submit our development repository as is. We actually have to transfer these files through a eCTD gateway. That's like the electronic common transfer document specifications. And there are a lot of requirements for that, one of which is a very rigid, I should say specific, folder structure. And that's what you see on the little screen grab on the right side there. But it's not only that, right? There are other things we need to do besides creating the folders, such as compile that aforementioned analysis data set reviewer guide. We also like to put a cover letter with a submission. Again, really trying to replicate what we would submit to the FDA in a real, drug or sponsors, new drug application submission. But there are other things as well, right? We got another the checklist here, such as, of course, in this folder structure, we have to actually move the dataset files and the R programs and any other supporting files to their correct location. And yes, we have to be 100% correct on that. Otherwise, it won't even go through the transfer gateway. And there's even more to that than that. We also have to potentially update file names to meet the specification guidelines, because there are things that you might take for granted that these guidelines say are not allowed, such as capital letters as a file extension, other things like that. You'd be amazed at some of the things we have to do. And last but not least, once I've done this kind of locally, so to speak, I need to manually push this up to another GitHub repository that will be the basis of this eventual transfer to the FDA. So imagine doing all this manually while you're trying to balance all of the other tasks in these pilot submissions, which is a lot of development work, a lot of collaboration, a lot of organization. And I do admit, especially in pilot 2, with everything going on in that Shiny submission. Next slide, please. A lot of times I would just get overwhelmed and I've had it with this manual stuff. There's got to be a better way, right? Well, as I was getting involved with GitHub Actions, I've learned some interesting things about this. One of which is that when you start looking at what they actually do, there are parts in a GitHub Action workflow where you can just run arbitrary commands or even scripts inside the workflow. And one little aha moment I had is that I always like to see how things are built. I'm an open source enthusiast. I love being able to look behind the scenes, whether it's an R package or a utility in the Linux community. And when I would see the actual source of these GitHub Actions, more often than not, they are scripts in Linux of bash commands. Get to that later. So with that knowledge, and also the knowledge of that we can launch these actions, these workflows to trigger on key events, such as an update to the main branch of the repository, or in an automated schedule if you want to update something repeatedly via the cron syntax. And another thing I learned along the way is that we can let the GitHub action act as if they're us and do some operations in Git itself, such as perhaps even push stuff to another repository. So armed with that, I went to work, so to speak, on if I was an R user and I was just typing commands in the R console to do like data ingestion, data processing, visualization, that would get really tiring after a while. We often write R scripts to do this. Well, with the GitHub action, I created a custom bash script that automated the majority of those manual operations that I was doing on my local setup to create the directories. I would set up environment variables to have the full paths to these, and then also make, copying over the relevant scripts. In this example here, Ben helped make this really nice helper function script for the Pilot 5. And this little snippet here is just some bash commands. So just copy this over to the right file based on variables that I define. It's not that difficult, especially if you're familiar with R, to create one of these. And as we mentioned earlier, you have tools in the Gen AI space and LLMs to help you make this script even quicker than it was when I first started doing this. So that's one set of it, to create this bundle and the directory structure for this. So that's one step. Step 2 is coming up on the next slide here, where now we want to actually push what I've created in that action over to that separate repository. And this is the part that still seems magic to me, but it works, and it works in a great fashion. You can run Git commands in a bash script that are launched in this actions. And you can make it as if it's what you might call the system user. We just call it GitHub Actions. You could use it, call it whatever you like. But you get to do these Git operations in the command line in this action via this bash script. That is still just magical to me. And while I don't have it on the screen here, another nice benefit of the GitHub Action workflow, when we talked about the ADRG, I also built in the Pilot 5 repo and actually Pilot 4 as well, custom actions to take the Quartal source document of the ADRG, use Quartal to render it in two different formats, HTML format and PDF format. We end up having to submit the PDF format in the eCTD structure for these pilots, but I really like the HTML format as a good way to kind of quickly take a look at the contents, send a link around to the rest of the pilot working group, and make sure we got everything on track. And so I built a GitHub action to take the publishing of those or the rendering of those, publish it to two places, the HTML version on my Quartal Pubs account, the PDF version to object storage on, in this case, Lenovo, it could be AWS, could be anything like that, so that I could put links to these in like the README of the repo or just send it in an IM or an email. And that way, every time we make an update to the repo and make an update to the ADRG, it's going to be available in a few minutes online. GitHub Actions really helps simplify this. So looking at the end product of this, if you will, for this Pilot 5 project on the next slide, we do have indeed a separate repository. Actually, yeah, I was too quick here. This is a snapshot of what that GitHub action actually looks like, where you see here, we got different names. Those are kind of like the different steps that you do in an action. And the run command is simply a call to bash for these different scripts. So you see that for the creating the bundle, and then you see it for archiving the bundle, and that's thanks to Eli, a great tip there that I didn't realize was possible. And then that's bookend by the pushing to the separate eCTD repository. Again, simple scripts and bash to make all that happen. And then once you have that all done, on the next slide, you'll see a screen grab of our Pilot 5 eCTD repository. This again is separate from the Pilot 5 development repository, but if you have it on your screen or look later on, you will notice that commit messages on this repo are more often than not the GitHub Actions commit message, which is as if I was doing all this manually, but guess what? It's doing it automatically. This has been a huge time saver, especially when I was hands-on with Pilot 4 especially, and also now with Pilot 5. We got a lot of moving parts, a lot of scripts that are being updated. Just to have this done automatically and take away that potential for human error. I, of all people, have messed up quite a bit on my manual pushes to GitHub, so having a GitHub action take care of all that for me for something as critically important as the eCTD bundle that we're transferring our hard work in, you don't want to take shortcuts of that. You want to make sure it's repeatable, it's automated, and that you ruled out error. And if I do see an error, I can go back to that script, update it, refresh the action, and everything's taken care of. So in essence, my contribution to this Pilot 5 has been quite small in this version, but I do think things like this, GitHub Actions, just enable us, no matter big or small, to really have a meaningful contribution to making our life in collaboration for these very intense, high demand projects a heck of a lot easier than it was in the past. So I guess I can turn over to Ben for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Just again, this is a all volunteer group. I mean, I imagine our respective companies allow us to be here, like mine, GSK, but this is something that we do like on the evenings, on the weekends, to kind of investigate, explore ways to deliver R-based submissions to the FDA. So it is like a side job. So we're always looking for ways, or side kind of volunteer effort. So we're always looking for ways to kind of implement new ways of working or the latest tech and processes to make our lives easier, so we can just really focus on delivering, that Atom dataset package that was done in R to the FDA, or the dataset JSON files to the FDA. So we want to try to reduce as much manual effort as we can, because really we want to stay focused on the scope of the pilot that we're doing here. And again, and we'll put this in the chat, but if you're interested in the joining the submissions working group, or looking more how to get involved with the R Consortium, you can click here for more information. And we did have quite a few questions come up in the chat. So,
Yeah.
but I guess other closing remarks from other folks?
No, thank you. This is amazing. I want to also double click that. Yeah, I think like in addition to having those like exciting pilots with FDA to showcase the feasibility of our submissions, I also feel like this has been a really amazing learning experience for me, and and also a very good experimental place to try out new things. And I need to say that I feel like almost all my CI/CD knowledge came from watching what Eric and Eli did in those pilots. It has been really, really inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, that goes for me. A lot of my Git and GitHub knowledge has come from working on these pilots, as well as like working on Rev, which has translated to a lot of value at my company. For me, for my like personal growth, it's just made my day job a lot easier, knowing these tools exist and pushing for them and using them. So it's a good opportunity to kind of experiment.
Yeah. I see there are many questions in the Q&A, and thank you for starting to answering them, Eli and Ben. Maybe we can pick some of them to double click on them. I see there are many questions more about like how to get started and how to learn those new tools, how to adopt them in their day-to-day work. Maybe we can start from Git. I know many people, like if they're trained as a programmer, they have been using those traditional like a click like tools like to promote a code to production, etc. And Git may be a new concept for many people. I wonder, how did you get started, and do you have any tips on like how to adopt Git workflow, etc.? Yeah.
Oof, boy. Yeah, I don't I mean, I think it's like being able to work on open source projects where you can see how people have evolved these workflows. Is really helpful to see that in action before you try to make it happen internally at your organization, or on your on a study. Like I think Eli was talking about what works well. Like it's like like the Git flow process. If it's just the two of you. I mean, actually, to develop this like little presentation, we all worked in the main branch, and we had no issues. So but it's just like because we know each other, we know our workflows. We were working on separate sections of the file. It was very easy. But like, if there was more of us, we probably would have started doing more feature branches to make updates. And if there were more files we were updating. So I think it's really kind of, if you can expose yourself to more opportunities to learn Git, I think that will go a long way. But as far as like adopting it, especially if your organization already kind of lacks Git infrastructure to begin with, I feel like it will be some growing pains. I don't know if.
And the other thing I'll say is you don't want to try too much at once. There are so many aspects to Git, and I'm sure, Eli and Ben can attest to this. There's almost impossible to know everything you can do with Git. You just know what you need to get that particular task done at first, and it won't be nearly as overwhelming if you literally try to read the Git manual verbatim. I never did that. I never wish anybody would do that. It's really just knowing what you can do with it. And communication in a project, is really important anytime, but especially with a multi-developer setup in a project enabled by Git. So the more you can kind of practice that, like Ben, I would watch other projects, whether in the R community or elsewhere, and kind of see what their cadence is, how they manage issues, how they're managing pull requests, how they're managing, how things are merged to the main branch. You can always learn something just by, watching what other people do. I think that's a great technique.
And that's Eli, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just to add on to that, the one thing I've seen kill enthusiasm for Git would be over engineering your process. Make sure you have different branches, make sure you have you're not overwriting each other's work. But if you want to, kill enthusiasm, make a super complicated, Git flow diagram and make everyone do it. So I would start as simple as possible if you're starting to get going at your company.
Totally. And then, like Eric, you mentioned about communication. I also think like using Git is not only the tool, but also kind of like the project management side. Like how you communicate depends on your audience, like whether people are all like Git experts or they are beginners, etc. And I see in the question there is one question about like how to resolve merge conflict, maybe more on who to resolve merge conflict. And I know you are all contributing to many open source projects. I always feel like for any open source project, there is one lead that kind of like manage, like a key contributor manage the issues and merge conflicts, etc. Maybe can you talk a little bit about this kind of like decision making process when using Git, or project management aspect of using Git?
Well, I mean, so GitHub has really made it easy to solve. Most of the time, the merge conflicts are very minor, and GitHub has made it, the interface has made it. I don't have experience with GitLab or other tools, but they've made the UI interface very easy to kind of manage those conflicts. And I would say, like if you're working on a GitHub-based project like that and you see a merge conflict, it actually might be very simple to resolve and not to shy away from that. But I would say that larger conflicts that come up in files are problematic, and there are GUI tools like in RStudio that make it a little easier to navigate rather than like using something like Vim to try to minimize conflicts. So I do think RStudio has a nice GUI for trying to like review and deal with merge conflicts. So that's sort of how I've approached it over the years. I've yet to kind of be stymied by a merge conflict. In recent times, I think in the beginning I was overwhelmed by it, but again, GitHub, RStudio, those GUIs kind of make it nice to interact with them. Eric, Eli?
Yeah, I do think it's helpful as a project's going and there's going to be more than a handful of developers that, as Ning, you said, there kind of is one point person to handle or coordinate all these pull requests coming in and making sure they're meeting the needs of that feature and also not totally, causing any big regressions, and really instilling the expectations that if someone's going to work on a new feature or fix a bug, that when they start, they make sure they're up to date with what's already happened in the repo. A lot of times merge conflicts can be avoided as long as you just keep up to date with what's happening upstream. That can alone be a big help to avoid all that. But actually, I'll take our renv as an example here. There's when my projects, I often will have one person be the point person, mostly me usually. If there's somebody that needs a new R package in the log file, they talk to me first, and then we figure out, okay, what's the best way to get that in so that it doesn't hurt the development environment of everyone else, or at least communicate that there's a new change, and everybody please refresh their log files. So there are certain parts of a repo where you do have to probably be more hands-on with that kind of deliberate control. And then other things, as Ben said, there may be very minor things that can be solved in the UI itself. So I think it depends on which part you're contributing to. But being up to date and communicating that is a great way to avoid those particular issues.
GitHub also has a nice feature if you mess with your settings for a pull request to have update branch be an automatic suggestion for you. So like, especially for, I think, new folks who are worried about that getting really divergent from the upstream, like you can update your branch once you have a PR set up. I mean, there's other ways to do it in Git, but again, I think the GUIs can make your life a lot easier when working with Git.
And so there are several questions asking whether like Git is becoming like a mainstream tool for pharma companies. At least like within Roche, basically like we are using Git in our primary reporting like workflow. So that is the version control tool we're using in the latest ICE. And Eric and Ben and Eli, can you share a little bit on your knowledge, maybe from your company or your client, whether like you see Git being used in the primary workflow for maybe programmers? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, big time. I mean, all the Pharmaverse projects that I work on, they're all GitHub based, Git based projects. So it seems to be a very popular tool, version control. And then internally, yes, we're very into version control at GSK. It's like our bread and butter now.
I'd say our journey at my company, we're in the clinical programming side, we still have a bit of a ways to go, but we're making efforts to start that transition sooner than later. But then when we develop like an internal R package, an internal Shiny application, we use GitHub and Git all the time for that. And it's been a huge, huge help for us as we build these capabilities through code.
Yeah, and for some of our clients, I would say only a couple of them, of the few dozen that I've looked at, don't use Git in some capacity. So it's becoming a lot more prevalent in development of tools and R packages. It's also becoming more prevalent in actual clinical analysis code. So I would say, yeah, it's very common from what I can see and becoming more so.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're also discussing offline that maybe after this presentation, we can do a small blog post and then reach out to different companies to see whether they adopt Git, what like a workflow they follow. As Eli mentioned, there is no one size fit all. It will be nice to see how different companies approach it. And maybe switch the gear a little bit, talking about like CI/CD and the GitHub Actions. I saw there are a couple of questions in terms of how to get started to learn about CI/CD, GitHub Action, and I also saw a question specifically asking that if they want to implement the automated QC of comparing two figures, where to start, like what are the key components to consider. I wonder, like Eli and Eric, do you want to share a little bit on like where people can look for information, where they can experiment? Yeah.
I admit, it seemed intimidating when I first saw all this being talked about many years ago. I'll find the link and put it in the chat shortly. When I started seeing some at Posit, the company behind our studio, start to adopt GitHub Actions and their R packages, that definitely got my attention. There was a talk back at the 2020 RStudio Conf by Jim Hester, a former engineer there, who talked about GitHub Actions for R. And that was kind of like my first taste of what it could do. But then honestly, the rest of my learning was basically looking at a bunch of repositories and then just taking bits or pieces of it. Starting from the R side, that was my biggest help because as Eli mentioned, there's the rlib organization that has GitHub Actions for many package development workflows and whatnot. Combined with my side hobby of listening to and watching Linux content, I saw some GitHub Action stuff being talked about there. So really, once I got the seed planted, I literally just practiced it on some of my repos, even if they weren't meant to do anything too useful, just to get a handle on it. And GitHub is what you often hear about for this because it does have the most of the market share for CI/CD in terms of version control and whatnot. But if you're in an organization and you have to run this within your firewall, two options that come to mind would be GitLab, which is another GitHub-like provider, but you can self-host that on your infrastructure, as well as on the CI/CD part. There's a cool utility I learned from the self-hosting podcast I've listened to called Woodpecker CI that I put in the answer there in one of those questions. That if you just want the CI/CD aspect of it built with containers, Woodpecker is a good way to go there too.
Yeah, I mean, I've used GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, probably some Azure DevOps, probably some I'm forgetting. All of them pretty much have the same functionality in terms of being able to create these Git flows and do some of the things that we're talking about here. A few people in the Q&A have posted the list of our live actions. Sometimes it's interesting to just look through those to see all the things you can do. Yeah, and also if you want to look at specifically what we did for the TLF QC check, I posted a link to that in the Q&A as well. You should be able to check that out.
Yeah, and someone posted to use this package, which has some very handy, like just Git vanilla kind of GitHub Actions for your project, and you can just experiment on like a simple R package that you're just making, and you can just use this package is very nice for setting this stuff up.
And I feel, as Eli mentioned earlier, I feel like a good starting point maybe just like publishing a like a page or like slide deck like this one, right? Eric, I feel like the first time I start to understand CI/CD is when you create a GitHub action to like publish the meeting notes from R Consortium. Yeah, so maybe that's something easy for people to implement. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It felt less intimidating to just simply take what I already know with Quarto or R Markdown before that and just simply automate the process of publishing that to a site. It's amazing how powerful that is, but then it really starts to get your creative juices going. And also, I think it's that first hurdle that you overcome. And then you realize, oh, I can apply this to code development too. It really was a great way to gently ease my way into the GitHub Action lifestyle.
Eli, would you mind share a little bit more about like once people get familiar with the concept of a GitHub action, how can they start building their automated QC bot? Can you share a little bit on your journey over there? Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. So I mean, we kind of talked about this in one of the Pilot 5 meetings. Was Ben said, you know, we have this need of we need someone to review these things, and a couple of us just had the idea to hand it off to an AI bot. So we explored a couple different methods of doing that. So at this point, it just kind of takes the two files. The actual QC report is a little messy because it has to convert it, you know, from PDF and from RTF and all of that, and that's kind of tricky. But the idea is it takes these two files that an LLM can compare and just basically gives it to us. So the first, and another really cool thing it does is it comments in the GitHub PR, and that's also very handy to get that feedback. And so that's what you're seeing there with the sync setup. It's syncing everything it needs to post in the comment. And here you're seeing there's some Waldo compare for things that don't need to be sent to the LLM. If it's just a .out file, you don't have to do a lot of comparing there. And then there's the status emoji there. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, yeah, so here it's converting everything into, I believe, PNG. And then at line 113, that's where it's actually being sent out to the AI. So that's us saying, here's your new image, here's your comparison image. What do you think? And it was a pretty iterative process of like figuring out how everything goes together, how to get it out to the GitHub action. So my recommendation is to just start iterating on it. Don't be intimidated because this is, probably version 6 of all the different bots that or all the different processes that I had to work with.
Thank you very much. I see we're almost on top of hour, so maybe we'll close here. And I see most of the question has been answered in the Q&A. And as a follow-up, like we will planning to do a blog post as well to share a little bit more details. And if anyone want to contribute, just let us know. And then the R Consortium working groups are always welcome new members as well. So maybe with that, I'll hand it to Jesse.
Yeah, just a final word from the R Consortium. This is a fantastic webinar. Thank you very much. The R Consortium main website itself is Quarto-based. Everything's in Markdown with QMD files. You guys have kind of inspired me to take another look at our GitHub Actions. We do publish using GitHub Actions, but just there's a couple spots where I think we could make it a little bit more efficient and easier on the publishing side. So actually, I got a takeaway myself from this. So thank you very much to the audience. Appreciate you coming. We do have a regular schedule of webinars through the R Consortium, so please take a look. And thank you very much to our speakers, Ning, Eli, Ben, and Eric. Just fantastic today. Thank you.
Thanks again, all. Thanks for tuning in.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.